Every dressing room has one player nobody wants to sit near before a match. At Manchester United in the 1990s, that man was Eric Cantona, and even his own teammates admitted there were nights they didn't know which version of him would show up. Picture the walk first, collar popped, chest out, eyes fixed somewhere past the crowd, like he was silently daring anyone in the stadium to say something. Sir Alex Ferguson would later describe it as a man who carried himself as if constantly asking a single unspoken question. Was everyone around him big enough to handle him? That presence alone unsettled opponents before a ball was even kicked. But the fear ran deeper than posture. It came from knowing that at any moment, Cantona could turn a football match into something far more dangerous. To understand why, you have to go back to where it started. In the hills above Marseille, in a house that began its life as a cave. Cantona's grandfather had settled there in the 1950s, in a spot rumored to have been used as a Nazi lookout post during the war. That was the world Cantona grew up in. Rugged, isolated, shaped by a family that had crossed borders and survived hardship to get there. From the beginning, there was something untamed in him, and French football would feel it long before England ever did. By the time he reached Nimes in 1991, that temper had already followed him through 3 different clubs. During a match against Saint-Étienne, furious at a referee's decision, Cantona snatched the ball and hurled it directly at the official. He didn't even wait to be sent off. He turned and walked straight down the tunnel while the crowd jeered behind him. What happened next revealed exactly who he was. Summoned to a disciplinary hearing in Paris, Cantona was handed a 1-month ban. Instead of accepting it quietly, he stood, walked toward each member of the panel individually, looked them in the eye, and called every single one of them an idiot. His punishment doubled on the spot, and Cantona's response was even more extreme. At just 25 years old, at the peak of his talent, he announced his retirement from football entirely, walking away from the French game for good. It took Michel Platini himself to talk him out of it, convincing Cantona that England might be the place to start over. Nobody in France could have predicted what that decision was about to unleash. Leeds United took the gamble first, and it paid off almost immediately, as Cantona helped fire them to the league title. But by November 1992, in a move that stunned English football, he crossed enemy lines to Manchester United. 3 months later, he was back at Ellen Road, and the reception was brutal. For 90 minutes, Leeds fans who had once idolized him screamed abuse in his direction. As he walked toward the tunnel after a scoreless draw, something in him broke. He turned, stared straight at a group of supporters near the barrier, and spat toward them. The Football Association fined him £1,000, and English newspapers wasted no time branding him unpredictable, a player capable of anything. They had no idea what was still coming. A few months later, in November 1993, Manchester United traveled into one of the most hostile atmospheres in football history, Galatasaray Stadium in Istanbul. Banners promised the visitors a trip to hell, and thousands of fans made sure it felt that way. The match itself ended goalless, eliminating United from the competition, and Cantona, already boiling with frustration at the home side's time wasting, lashed out at a player on the ground and was sent off. Then it got worse. As United's players were escorted off the pitch under a barrage of objects thrown from the stands, a Turkish police officer struck Cantona across the back of the neck with a baton just to move him faster. Brian Robson rushed to protect his teammate and took a blow from a police shield to the face for it. By the time they reached the locker room, most players just wanted to breathe. Cantona wanted to go back outside. Roy Keane later wrote about that night in his autobiography, describing Cantona as completely consumed with rage, determined to find the officer who had struck him and settle it there in a stadium full of rioting fans and armed police. Keane admitted he never usually backed down from confrontation, but that night, he and the rest of the team physically held Cantona back. Going out there, he said, would have been suicide. 4 months later, English football got another reminder of how quickly Cantona could snap. Manchester United traveled to face relegation-threatened Swindon Town, and midway through the second half, Cantona and Swindon midfielder John Moncure collided in a tangled challenge. Instead of getting back to his feet, Cantona twisted and drove his studded boot straight into Moncure's chest. Moncure later said he genuinely couldn't breathe for a moment, that the impact knocked the wind clean out of him and left a deep mark on his skin. It was Cantona's second red card in 4 days. And still, nothing could have prepared anyone for what happened at Selhurst Park. January 25th, 1995. Manchester United were locked in a fierce title race, and the away trip to Crystal Palace turned toxic almost immediately. Defender Richard Shaw had been assigned to shadow Cantona all game, needling him with rough tackles and constant fouls. By the 48th minute, Cantona had had enough. He kicked out at Shaw and was shown a straight red card. As he walked toward the tunnel under police escort, a Crystal Palace supporter named Matthew Simmons sprinted down 11 rows of stairs to scream abuse in his direction. What happened next has been replayed millions of times since. Cantona stopped, turned, and launched himself feet first into Simmons' chest in a flying kick, following it up with a series of punches before security dragged him away. The consequences were seismic. The Football Association hit him with an 8-month ban and a £20,000 fine. He lost the captaincy of the French national team. A court initially sentenced him to 2 weeks in prison before reducing it to 120 hours of community service. Gary Pallister, standing near him that night, later admitted he simply froze, completely in disbelief at what he was watching unfold in front of him. Everyone at the club knew Cantona had a short fuse. Nobody imagined it looking quite like this. For 8 months, English football held its breath, wondering whether Eric Cantona would ever wear the shirt again. He came back different, and somehow even more dangerous, just in a way defenders feared for entirely different reasons. On December 21st, 1996, Sunderland arrived at Old Trafford, and before kickoff, their goalkeeper Lionel Perez, a former teammate of Cantona's from France, refused to shake his hand in the tunnel. It was a small snub, but it seemed to light something in him. With United already up 4-0 in the 80th minute, Cantona collected the ball at the halfway line, glided past 2 defenders, exchanged a 1-2 with Brian McClare, and spotted Perez drifting off his line. He lifted the ball over him with a chip so soft and precise it landed just inside the far post. He didn't celebrate. He simply stood still, raised his collar, puffed his chest, and turned in a slow circle to take in the entire stadium in silence. Roy Keane described it perfectly in his book, Collar Up, Back Straight, Chest Out, Eric strolling into the moment like he owned the whole world. By the time he retired from Manchester United in 1997, the numbers told their own story. Across 5 seasons, he played 185 matches and scored 82 goals in all competitions. In the Premier League alone, he racked up 64 goals and 51 assists in 143 appearances. United won at a rate of over 63% whenever he featured, climbing to nearly 71% at Old Trafford. He remains the only player in English football history to win back-to-back league titles with 2 fierce rivals, Leeds United and Manchester United. Paul Ince summed it up years later, saying Cantona carried a presence that dominated the entire locker room, as if he walked in and told every single one of them he was there to win the title for them and nothing was going to stop that. That's really the answer to why the legends were afraid. It was never just about the kicks, the bans, or the headlines. It was the sense that Eric Cantona operated by his own rules, that no referee, no rival, no riot police, and sometimes not even his own teammates could predict what he'd do next. Genius and danger lived in the same man, and nobody around him ever quite knew which one was about to show up.